They say some moments sneak up on you, not with thunder, but with a quiet question that lingers. I never thought a simple favor, helping my son's friend with his schoolwork, would turn into a moment that made me question parts of myself I thought I'd tucked away years ago. What he said that afternoon, it stopped me cold, and everything changed after that. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I love seeing all the cities this story reaches. Drop your city in the comments below. I'm really curious who's out there. My name is Hannah. I'm 52 years old and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Denver. Life for me, well, it had settled into a rhythm familiar and predictable. Mornings filled with coffee and emails. Evenings spent tidying the house or rewatching old movies while waiting for my son Samuel to come home from college classes or football practice. It was a warm Thursday afternoon when it started. The windows were open, letting in that late spring breeze, and I had just finished folding a load of laundry when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peeked out and saw him. Daniel, one of Samuel's closest friends. I hadn't seen Daniel in a while, not since winter break, when they were all piled in the living room watching sports and eating everything in the pantry. He was a polite boy back then, tall, lanky, always laughing. But when I opened the door that day, I was surprised. He had grown, filled out. His voice was deeper and there was a new confidence in the way he stood. "Hi, Mrs." he said with a soft smile. "I hope it's okay I stopped by." I blinked, still adjusting. "Of course, Daniel. Is everything all right?" Yeah, he nodded quickly. "I was just Samuel mentioned you used to tutor him in English and I've got this assignment due tomorrow. I'm kind of stuck. I was hoping you might have a minute." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to help, but something about his expression caught me. He looked almost nervous. "Come in," I said finally. "Let's take a look." We sat at the dining room table and he pulled out his laptop. The assignment wasn't hard, just needed a bit of structure and clarity. He listened intently as I explained sentence flow and paragraph cohesion. He took notes, asked questions, leaned in when I pointed at the screen. At one point, I glanced up and caught him watching me. Not in a disrespectful way, not even flirtatious, just attentive, present. I felt something shift. A strange warmth crept into the space between us. I brushed it off. "You're actually better at this than I told myself." If it was just a harmless moment, a nice compliment, a boy being kind, maybe a little too observant for his age, but still nothing I should read into. I went about my chores as usual, cleaned the kitchen, ran errands, watered the plants, but no matter how I filled my time, my thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel. His words echoed in my head. Asterisk. Do you ever miss it? Feeling important. Seen asterisk. I didn't want to admit how much that struck a chord. I'd spent years giving myself to others. My husband, my son, my family, and somewhere along the line I'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly noticed. Not just for what I did, but for who I was. That evening, Samuel came home late from a group study session, exhausted and hungry. As I heated up leftovers, I casually asked, "Did you see Daniel today?" Samuel shrugged. "Yeah, in class. Why?" "Just wondering if his paper turned out all right." He nodded. He said, "You were a big help. He really appreciated it." I smiled, forcing it to stay casual. That's good to hear. But inside my chest fluttered. Later that night, while I was tidying the living room, I heard the familiar ping of a message on Facebook. I didn't use it much, mostly for old family photos and recipe shares. But when I checked, I saw Daniel's name. *K. "Hope I'm not bothering you. Just wanted to say thanks again. I haven't stopped thinking about what you said yesterday. ***. I stared at the message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could ignore it, let it die there, but part of me didn't want to. I typed ***. "You're welcome. You asked a good question. Most people don't." Almost immediately he replied. ***. Think you've got a lot more to say. Would you ever want to just talk sometime? Like really talk?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, my mind battling itself. He was young. He was my son's friend, but he wasn't a child. He was in college, nearly 21, and more emotionally self-aware than some men twice his age. Still, I had every reason to say no. Every reason except I didn't want to. Maybe ***. I finally typed ***. Talking never hurt anyone. The next afternoon, Daniel came by again. This time, no laptop, no homework, just 2 coffees in his hands, and that same gentle look in his eyes. I figured you'd like a break, he said. And I remembered you like your coffee with cinnamon. I blinked. How you'd know that? He smiled. You may at once over winter break when I came by. You probably didn't notice, but I did. We sat on the back patio. The sky was cloudless. The air was warm, and the hum of cicadas filled the silence between our words. We talked about books, about why he was studying psychology, about how I used to write short stories before motherhood became a full-time job. He listened, not out of politeness but with real attention. At one point I laughed at something he said, and felt the tension in me ease. I hadn't laughed like that in a long time, freely without second-guessing how I looked or sounded. I don't know why I said sipping my coffee, but I feel like I can be honest with you. You can, he replied simply. I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here. That simple sentence undid something in me. I looked at him differently then, not just as my son's friend, but as someone who, in a strange and unexpected way, saw me more clearly than anyone else had in years. And I think he felt it too. He didn't try to touch me, didn't cross any lines, but the energy between us shifted, subtle but undeniable. As he stood to leave, he paused. Can I ask something kind of personal? I nodded slowly. Are you happy? It wasn't a question I was prepared for. Not then. I swallowed, eyes locked on his. I don't know, I said quietly. I think I've been on autopilot for a while. He nodded as if he understood completely. Then he left. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same as the one from a week ago. There was a softness in her eyes, a flicker of something long dormant. I didn't know where this was going. I wasn't even sure I wanted to know. But I knew one thing. Something had been awakened and it wasn't going back to sleep. The days that followed passed in a strange kind of stillness, like the air before a storm. I went about my routines as always. Laundry, grocery shopping, late-night phone calls with my sister about nothing in particular. But underneath it all, I was distracted. My mind wandered mostly to Daniel. It wasn't just his words or the way he looked at me. It was something deeper. The way he listened, the way I felt when I was around him. As if the parts of myself I tucked away were being gently drawn out into the light. I didn't talk to anyone about it, not even my closest friend, who I usually told everything. I knew how it would sound. A middle-aged woman, mother of a college kid, spending time with her son's friend. People wouldn't understand. Maybe I didn't fully understand it myself. But I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. One evening I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard a knock at the back door. Not the front. Daniel knew I usually left the back one unlocked when I was home. I opened it and there he was again. Could he have zipped? Eyes soft and uncertain? I was out for a walk, he said, just thinking. I don't know why, but I ended up here. I stepped aside. You want to come in? He nodded quietly. We didn't say much at first. I handed him a mug and we sat on the couch, the TV on low in the background, playing an old movie I'd seen a dozen times. It was late. The house felt still, like it was holding its breath. I'm sorry, he said after a while. This is weird, I don't know. You're easy to be around. It's not weird, I replied. At least not to me. He turned slightly, facing me more directly. Can I be honest with you? I nodded. You make me feel safe. Like I don't have to pretend. And not just that. He hesitated, then went on. You're beautiful. I thought that since the first time I met you. My breath caught for a second. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I wasn't ready for that, not said so plainly, so vulnerably. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't a line. It was real. Daniel, I began, but my voice faltered. He didn't move closer. He didn't try to touch me. He just waited. You don't know what you're saying, I said softly. I do, he replied just as softly. And I know nothing has to happen. I just wanted you to know. I looked down at my hands resting on my lap, fingers trembling slightly. I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel wrong. What I felt was conflicted, torn between what I was supposed to feel and what I actually did. So much of my life had been about boundaries, about roles, about doing the right thing, being the good mother, the patient wife. But in that moment, I wasn't any of those things. I was just a woman seen, appreciated, desired. When I looked up, his eyes hadn't wavered. I don't know what this is, I said. I don't know if it's real or if it's just a moment. Then let's just sit in the moment, he said, and not label it. We sat there for a long time in silence, letting the soft flicker of the TV cast light and shadow across the room. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence. At one point our hands touched, just barely knuckles grazing, and neither of us pulled away. It wasn't charged or suggestive. It was warm, steady. Eventually he stood. I should go, he said. Okay. But before he left, he turned to me again. I don't expect anything, he said gently. And I don't want to cause you trouble, but I meant what I said. You're more than just Samuel's mom to me. You always have been. Then he was gone. I stood in the doorway long after the door had closed, listening to the quiet hum of the house and the distant sound of his footsteps fading down the street. There were 1,000 things I should have felt. Guilt, doubt, fear, but none of those came. What I felt was clarity. This wasn't about a boy and a woman. It wasn't about temptation or secrecy. It was about being seen. And I realized something important in that stillness. Being desired wasn't what shook me. It was being valued. Being spoken to like a person, not a role. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't ready to let that go. The morning after Daniel's visit, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. It wasn't vanity. It wasn't regret. I was just looking at myself, really looking. My face had changed over the years. Softer at the jaw, lines at the corners of my eyes. A stillness that hadn't always been there. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I wasn't chasing something forbidden. I wasn't trying to recapture youth. It wasn't about wanting Daniel. It was about remembering myself and realizing how long I'd gone without that simple electric feeling of being fully present in someone's gaze. Still, reality had its own weight. Samuel came home that weekend. He brought laundry, stories from school, and the usual chaos. I watched him with quiet love, this tall, loud, good-hearted boy who still left crumbs everywhere and forgot to take his shoes off. He mentioned Daniel once briefly. Said he might stop by later, Samuel said between bites of his sandwich. He's been kind of out of it lately. Thought maybe he was dealing with family stuff. I just nodded. My throat felt tight. When Daniel did come by that evening, everything felt different. He greeted Samuel like usual, easy, relaxed. But when our eyes met across the kitchen, there was a flicker of something unspoken. A shared memory. A private truth that lived quietly between us. We didn't speak that night. Not really. I busied myself in the kitchen. Daniel joined Samuel in the den to watch a game. I could hear them laughing, shouting at the screen like nothing had changed. And in a way, nothing had. But everything had. After Samuel fell asleep on the couch, Daniel came into the kitchen for a glass of water. I was wiping the counter. My hand stilled when I saw him. You okay? He asked, his voice low. I nodded, even though the answer wasn't simple. I've been thinking, I said, my back still turned to him. About everything. I have too. I turned around slowly. He looked calm, mature, not a boy anymore, not just my son's friend. You need to live your life, I said. Figure out who you are. You have so much ahead of you and I. You don't owe me an explanation, he interrupted gently. I knew this was complicated. I just want to be fair, I whispered. You were, he said. You are more than anyone else I've ever known. I felt the weight of his words settle in the space between us. I'll carry this, he added. Not like a regret, more like something that changed me. My eyes welled with tears, but I smiled. Me too. He stepped forward slowly and hugged me. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't suggestive. It was warm, safe, like the closing of a chapter. He left a few minutes later. And that was it. The next few weeks passed quietly. Daniel didn't come by again, and I didn't expect him to. Samuel never suspected a thing. Life returned to its usual pace, but I hadn't gone back to who I was before. I started writing again. Just small pieces, reflections, memories, little moments I wanted to remember. I dug out old notebooks. I filled blank pages with honest words. One afternoon, while clearing out a closet, I found an old framed photo of myself taken when I was about 35. I was smiling at the camera, wind in my hair, standing barefoot on a beach. I barely remembered that day. But looking at the photo, I didn't see a younger version of myself. I just saw her me alive, present. And that's what Daniel gave back to me. Not a relationship, not a romance, but a mirror. A reminder that I still mattered, that I was still here. And I would never forget.